Welcome back to Trail and Ultra Running Training. My name is Will France. I'm a strength coach and a running coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to provide you with some information that allows you to run a little better and have more fun doing this sport that we enjoy. If you like it, I'd really appreciate it if you shared it with somebody or subscribed or did any of the things that tell the robots that this is useful to you. So if you do that, I'd really appreciate it. And let's talk today about off seasons, because I think this is one of the ways in which we hold ourselves back from really making progress, especially in the ultra running community, but in the running community in general, where this is true of every sport. I'm just talking to runners. Like, this is very true of a lot of sports. And we end up in this like year-round performance quest. And I think as a result, we impede our progress because we don't really let ourselves both recover and work on things that we're bad at, right? So the purpose of an off season is multifold. One is to recover. When you run a really long race, be that, or even just a really hard race, but the longer it is, the more it's going to matter if you are crossing that finish line feeling like you gave everything you had to give. Be that a 100-miler or a marathon or whatever. If you go race a 5K really hard, you need to recover. You're still pretty burnt. If you race a marathon really hard, you will need more recovery time. And this is even more true for ultras, for almost all of us. So the purpose of an off season, first and foremost, is to help you recover from the race in which you really tried to push yourself. And this is the difference for many in between like running a race just to run it and be with the community and have a good time versus like racing a race and going out there and giving your all and crossing the finish line feeling like you worked really hard, but you really didn't have anything else to give. Like, that level of performance requires recovery. And we can take a training like macro cycle. Often that's in terms of a year, but in running it can be a little shorter. If we look at a sport like football, this makes this really easy, and then we can talk about how to adapt this. But their in season is when games are happening weekly. So from like first game of the season to whenever their postseason, hopefully Super Bowl, happens, they are in season. The whole purpose there is not necessarily to get more athletic or to get fitter or to get in better shape. It is to perform. They have hopefully built most of what they need in the off-season, preseason, etc. And they are now putting all of that fitness and whatever to the test in season. The changes that are often going to make that someone's going to make in season is more on the like skill side. Like, they can get their pass structure or whatever better, but they're not necessarily going to improve as athletes because they're in this constant like push really hard and recover cycle, and there just isn't a lot of time to get stronger. We can get a little stronger, especially if programming is done incredibly well. We're seeing some really good strategies in high-level athletics where they pair their strength training. They do almost daily strength training, but only a couple movements, paired around practices in a way that allow them to get stronger through the season. But it's rare and difficult and tough. And then post-season is going to be just recovery. Post is really you're trying to bring your body back to homeostasis, which just means it's like happy settling point. So you're going to probably consume a lot of extra food during this performance space, and your gut's probably not going to be super stoked about it because it's more than it really wants to take in. So we're going to come back to whatever level of intake is reasonable for you, probably more vegetables and more whole foods than a lot of these like highly digestible carbohydrate drinks, that kind of stuff. And we're just going to return the body to happiness, get you sleeping better, and drop your cortisol down. And then off season is when we will work on skills, getting stronger, things that we're not very good at doing, and things that help our performance but aren't necessarily immediately applicable to performance. So this would be really heavy strength work for runners. This would be like VO2 max, top end cardio work for ultra runners. Like this is the stuff that we would like is helpful, but probably not a thing we're going to do really close to a race. And then preseason is just getting yourself ready for the race. It can be super short. It's probably more of a mental pep talk than anything else. Then in season is go time, right? And this calendar works really well for like traditional sports of, or at least the big five sports, or any of these sports where we have like weekly games for a period of time and then not weekly games for another period of time. It looks a little different in running because we're going to take that model, then in season probably means the race day. And that's probably technically it. We could branch it out a few weeks depending on how, none of this is set in stone, right? So you can view this however it helps your brain view it. You could push it maybe a month or two out from when you're really building a peak, doing a ton of tempo work. That could be what we'd view in season because that's when you're really starting to crank a lot of those like highly digestible carbohydrates. We're probably not necessarily making massive improvements. We're at this like fine tuning point. So any of that could be considered in season. But the point is, it's not a very long window for runners. It's not this like 20-week, or if you're in hockey, what is it, like 9 months? Their season is eternal. But it is a fairly short window to be in season as a runner. So instead of a yearly progression, we might see this like every 3 to 6 months on a smaller scale. But it is important for us after a big performance to take a post, to take some recovery, to bring our body back to like a happy, normal place. And then for our off season, or like really early season, however your brain wants to categorize it, this is when we want to work on our deficiencies or work on things that will help us improve performance but aren't directly one-to-one comparable to our race. And the things that I like to do here for especially ultra runners is going to be one, heavy strength training. I really like the message that we hear on currently going around the running community that heavy strength training is super helpful. But I think there is some level of responsibility with where we position it in a calendar. Because if you're working for a really heavy set of 5, that is a lot of stress, especially if you're pretty strong. That is a lot of stress on the joints. It is a lot of weight. It is a lot of fatigue on your nervous system. And if we're also running a very high running volume at this amount of time, at this same time, then it's just more stress than your body can really handle. So we don't really recover week to week, which means we might hit these performance plateaus, which is why I work on other strength work when we are in season. But in off season, this is where we might do something like a heavy back squat or a really heavy deadlift for like sets of 3. And this teaches the body to work as a unit. It teaches all of your muscles to work in tandem. It reinforces really good body positioning. It can point out some places where you might not move super well. But it's not a thing that I would do leading up to race day. Like trying to PR your deadlift before race day is just not a great idea. Like we should do that farther away, and we can get that value farther away. Other thing would be VO2 max work. And I probably wouldn't pair these things together because they're, again, both really stressful on the body, but this would be like high repeats of really short intervals. You've heard me talk about this before. On standard is like 5 by 3 minute hills. That is definitely going to give you a VO2 max stimulus. There are many ways to do this, but it's not really directly applicable to an ultra. Probably shouldn't be tapping into your VO2 max space during an ultra. You might touch it occasionally on a hill if for whatever reason, but it's not a great idea. There's this idea of burning matches, and we don't want to burn. You have a certain number of matches, and you can only burn so many during a race. Yeah, that's definitely a match if you're touching your VO2 max. So we want to keep heart rate lower than that. If you heard my interview with Celia about a 200 miler, then Celia said that she was in zone 3 a good amount. You're probably going to be in zone 3 a good amount on any race. Even at these really long distances, it is a race day, very highly applicable thing, which is why some lactate work or tempo work or whatever you want to call it stays really applicable all the way up through up to and through our taper. But VO2 max is better done farther away, because what we're really trying to do here is create like better cohesive movement of the body. Again, this does a very similar thing as heavy strength work, in that in order to run at your top, like high-end speed for a very long period of time, you need to move well as a unit. We can't shuffle super well running form. Like, it's really important. And we also see a raising of the top end, especially if you have this training history where you've been doing low and slow zone 2 running for a very long time. Then you probably don't have much of a top end. We see this like curve where your aerobic fitness is really high, and then your lactate and your VO2 max are like right over that. And we can't really get your aerobic fitness up anymore, because you have this low ceiling of like 0 VO2 max. So we have to raise that if we want to raise anything else. So that would be another good thing to do, kind of early season, off season, whatever you want to call it. And a lot of the time, we end up in this year-round race calendar where we have like one race a month, and we care about all of them. And I have this conversation where someone comes to me with a really full race calendar where they're doing some race every month. And we have this like A, B, C race conversation where, which are your A races? Like, what really matters to you? And they'll be like, all of them are my A races. And there's one way in which that makes sense. If you're a pretty good athlete and your goal for all of them, your A goal for all of them is to cross the finish line, then great. Like, you can probably do that, because when we look at finishing times for a lot of ultras, if your only goal is to cross that finish line, then like it's a lot of hiking. Right? I think a very standard finishing time for 100 miler is 32 hours, which puts you at like a 19, 20-ish minute mile. So you can do a lot of walking, you can do a lot of hiking, and not have it negatively affect your ability to cross the line. But when we look at a performance goal where you want to get sub 24 or sub 20 on 100, where we want to get like a sub 10 or sub 9 on a 50 miler, then that demands a lot more. And we have to start prioritizing races in our calendar to where some of these other races, like either you don't run them or you use them as training races to figure out hydration and nutrition and whatever. But if you're running a race every month, and we have a week or two recovery period from the race and then a week or two taper, you're in this constant recovery taper cycle, and we never actually get to do any training. And this is why we don't make progress, because the race calendar is too full, and we don't actually take an off season or take a step back to let ourselves recover and work on the deficiencies. We're constantly in this like high volume space, and it's not that you can't make some progress there. It's just going to be kind of slow, not very efficient, and it is going to require an insane amount of consistency at a very high volume of running that often will lead most people to injuries. Whereas if we take a step back, do fewer races, like 3 or 4 50Ks a year, or like 200 milers, and whatever like combination thereof that is probably achievable for most of us, And if we really just prioritize those and take them seriously and train for them, we can actually hit the performance goals we're looking for, and we can improve as a runner. But if you're constantly in this recovery taper cycle, we're not going to be able to work on the things that aren't race applicable, because the injury risk increases. We're not going to be able to do very heavy strength training if you're running an 80-mile week. We're not going to be able to work on a ton of VO2 max stuff if you're running an 80-mile week, because a lot of the extra time is just spent on recovery and spent on trying to figure out how to fit all of this stuff in. So I think there's this idea in the ultra running, or the running community in general, but definitely in the ultra running community, where if you don't run 20 races a year and have this like massive backstory on ultra sign up, then you aren't a real ultra runner. And that's just a load of bullshit, because it's not true. If you like the sport, if you like to go out, if you run a race every once in a while, or never run a race in your life, you're an ultra runner if you go out and put in more than a marathon on somewhere. And that can be an official race. It can be an adventure in the mountains. It can be a rim to rim to rim. It can be whatever. You're an ultra runner. You don't need to have this big history of races on ultra sign up in order to be a part of this sport, in order to have a place in this sport, in order to have a place in the community. If you want to be a bigger part of the community and you don't race, then go volunteer. Like, go help someone else who's racing. It's a really great way to spend your weekend in usually a really pretty area. That is a great way to participate while still allowing you to get in a lot of training and allowing you to run a season in a way that's really helpful. You don't need to run 20 races a year to be an ultra runner. And taking an off season and taking some recovery time and like planning your year in a way where we're really only trying to perform at a high level a couple times a year will absolutely increase your running performance. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I'm going to head out. I hope you have a great day and go have fun on the trails. Thank you again for listening to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Just a reminder, nothing you hear on this podcast is medical advice, and you should always speak with a medical professional before making changes to your training or your nutrition. If you enjoyed the podcast or found it helpful, please leave a rating or review. It tells the algorithm robots that people like it, and that means more people will hear it. Or even better, just share it with someone who you think would benefit. If you prefer a video version, head to the Trail and Ultra Running Training Group on Facebook, or check out the Mountain Goat Endurance Coaching YouTube channel. Thank you again, and I hope you have a great next run.